You are listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, then please like and review us on Apple Podcast and Spotify in particular. Also, support the show for $3, $5, or $10 a month and help us keep our microphones and our hosting and everything else up to date. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Siepen, and I'm pastor of the Village Church in Tucson, Arizona. And across from me is Pastor Andy Littleton, and he is pastor of the Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona. And we've been doing this podcast for like 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And we just keep talking to each other, and apparently people do listen to it. So
people do.
Today we answered Rick Drost's question about your book, Chapter 5, and just the discussion of the depiction of Jesus and its impact on our relationship with him and others.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think great conversation.
So I think it's a plug for your book, which you get to hear a summary of it at the beginning, so
That's
people
right.
can kind of know what they'll be getting into. And you can find it on Amazon. If you type in Andy Littleton, you will find his stuff.
And there's some locally at Gospel Supplies.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've got one with me in my truck.
Right. So if you see him locally, be like,
just
hey,
wave me down.
Hey, I need a book. And he may have one of his 3 books in his car.
I just might.
Okay. Question before we close. Do you ever just pick up one of your books and just say, I think I'll reread this, and then read it?
Not yet.
Okay, just check it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, enjoy the podcast. Hey, Andy. Good to see you.
Hey.
Been a while.
Yeah.
A couple weeks.
Yeah. It's probably going to happen from time to time.
Time to time.
By the way, there's going to be 2 months where I won't be here this year.
Me too.
Yeah, cool. Which ones?
June and July.
In July and August.
All right. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some best of and stuff like that so people can re-listen.
You should do worst of.
Yeah, maybe worst of that. Oh, that would be hilarious.
That would be
hilarious.
hilarious.
Do that. I'm going to do, we'll rotate it back and forth.
Yeah.
Worst of, number 1 worst podcast.
Like the one that just had the most chewing noises from early days.
Right. I could replay some early day podcasts. People would get a kick out of those, I think.
They might.
Because people haven't minded that deeply.
No.
How many years? 3, 4 years of this podcast?
I don't even know.
There's just longevity. That's what we're about. It's just we're going to outlast you.
Yeah. Yeah. You may not like it, but it's not going away. It's going to be in your face.
What else would you have to listen to? That's right.
What else? Yeah. What else? There's nothing else out there. What are you going to do? So we got a question from
Rick Drost.
Rick Drost, who is Eric's former youth pastor.
Yeah.
Who I met recently.
Oh, cool. That's right. You signed his book and everything.
I signed his book. Yep.
Very cool.
So, remind us what the question was.
Remind us. I mean, I think it's best, instead of me paraphrasing it, is just to read it.
That's probably true.
I will not do it justice. I can tell you that much. So,
I fully agree.
All right. Here we go. This is from Rick Drost. I just finished reading Andy's book.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah. It's a quick, nice little short read.
It is. You
can read a chapter in like 8 minutes.
Yeah. If that. Yeah.
Yeah. If that. I mean, if you're a slow reader.
Yeah.
It was very thought-provoking and historically informative. I loved it! ! Chapter 5 is especially interesting to me for Andy's information. Let me remind Eric that my 3 children are adopted, and all 3 are radically diverse. Our oldest, Josh, is Native American. Our second son, Caleb, is African American, and our youngest daughter, it's Hadassash. Hadassah is Hispanic. My desire is that each of my children would identify with Jesus in both their faith and their humanity. My son Caleb recently posted an Instagram picture of a white Jesus surrounded by children of various races and with the caption, "Look who is the only white man." I would love to hear the two of you discuss the issue of chapter 5 on Faith Over Breakfast. What are the dangers of portraying Jesus as white? What are the dangers of portraying him as black? What are the benefits of both? where can we see artistic representation of Jesus in new cultural forms?
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. It's a big question. Good question.
Yeah. So I guess really quick,
you give the background of the chapter, because you're it's an artist that you and a space in Tucson that you're kind of discussing in this book.
Yeah. So this is the book, What We Do with Jesus, which is based off of Felix Lucero's Garden of Gethsemane here in Tucson. And so it is on just west of the Congress Street Bridge on the north side of the street, right next to the Santa Cruz River. And the statues that are there, it's an art install. Well, so Lucero built these as a way of, in a sense, a penance for his life having been saved in the First World War. And he made them utilizing things that he found in the river and plaster, and they're pretty incredible. But they are absolutely the anglicized versions of Christ. And so what I was doing in the book was trying to explore questions that space, that place brought up for me that I thought might be thought-provoking to other Tucsonans. So the book is not just to Christians. It's really for anyone who is interested in that space to think through the history of the space and also to ask those questions with me. And one of the questions has to do with the way Jesus looks, right, for me.
This is chapter 5.
Yeah, and it really stands out in this garden because they're white plaster as well. But they also have very anglicized faces, and so it just jumps at you that everything's white. So that was a question I had, so I wanted to explore it. Then some of the things that informed that question are, number one, for me, I had one of Warner Salmon's images of Jesus. And if you've probably seen these, whether you realize it or not, these are very famous paintings that were widely distributed. So I had one that my great aunt gave me when I was a kid, and I had to really wrestle through what that meant at some point. That when I realized, I started really studying the Bible, and I thought, there's no way Jesus looked like that.
He's a very tall white Jesus.
Very tall white Jesus, yeah, with like really great abs all this stuff.
Wonderful beard, everything.
Yeah, manicured beard. Yeah. And a lot of that imagery is based on the Shroud of Turin, which is a Catholic relic where they believe it's the burial cloth of Jesus. And on the Shroud of Turin, that's kind of the face you see. And it's also based on the fact that a lot of people who built this narrative were more anglicized.
Right.
So anyway, I had that. I'd grappled with that when I was young. At some point, I had two posters I had Jesus, Warner Salmon's Jesus, and then I had Tupac Shakur and Snoop Doggy Dogg on my wall. And I remember looking up at that and just thinking, how does this work? How do these relate to each other? What? And interestingly, the Tupac talked a lot about God, and
yes, he did,
and even heaven, and some of the questions he asked were good ones, like, is there even a space in heaven for people like me?
Right.
So that's the song, I Wonder If Heaven's Got a Ghetto. And anyway, so I was, all that stuff was in my head. Number two, I had a conversation when I was about to write this chapter with Cruz from our church, who is, he's got some Australian in him, but some Mexican and Apache. And we had a good conversation. At first, he wasn't really bothered by the anglicized images, but then we kind of plowed into that a little bit. And a lot of that dialogue is in the
book,
the chapter.
In the chapter, yeah.
And then I had also, there's that now pretty famous rendering of what Jesus probably would have looked like, or similar, right, like what a man of his stature and his time would have looked like. He would. And it's jarring to those who are used to anglicized Jesus, but I think much more relatable to a lot of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a chapter in what's the book? It's Matt Michelados. And oh, come on, I'm forgetting the title of it. We can drop it in somewhere, but it's him grappling with who's the real Jesus, and he encounters this short little brown Jesus with a mouth that looked like a frog's mouth, and it just repulsed him, and he struggled with it, and it reminded me of that picture. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was referring to that picture. And so all of that, I didn't quote that book in there, honestly, because I didn't want to have to figure out, what to do with the quote and how to get that licensing and whatever. But that was in my head too. So I was weaving all that together in the chapter and asking the question of what does it mean for a man like Felix Lucero, who's native, to imagine Jesus looking quite different than him, and by extension, just maybe being quite different than him, not relating to him. I don't have any evidence that Lucero felt that way, but I think that's a general. There's a disconnect.
Right.
Okay. There you go.
There you go. So I think the question is, how do we deal with depictions of Jesus?
Absolutely.
And in particular, how do we deal with these depictions when they are like widely distributed, and how they shape our understanding of what Jesus looks like? So as I was pondering this, I mean, there are a couple things that I was thinking about. Number one, the easy one, Isaiah 55, and talking about there was nothing remarkable about Jesus that would draw us to him. And then,
really quick here, My Imaginary Jesus by Matt Michelados. And
gotcha.
It's an excellent book, a very unique way of thinking through the ways that maybe we've created Jesus in our own image. Okay.
Like it. Yeah. And so on the other hand, the one that I was thinking about is Revelation chapter 1, which presents a Jesus that is completely different than his humanity. One with, bronze feet and blazing eyes and sword out his mouth, and like this very, enough for John himself to just fall onto his face like he was dead. So when he experienced it. So there are these are two images that were given of Jesus and what he looks like in Scripture. But one thing I was thinking about in all of that, I'm like, well, if we portray Jesus as our race, then whenever our race sins against another,
yeah, right, he's with us.
He's with us, and he becomes the representative of that, and that's dangerous,
right?
So I think there's a part there. I personally I've watched 1 or 2 episodes of The Chosen, but I have a really hard time with The Chosen because of the depiction of Jesus. Not that he's probably more accurate looking, though he's very handsome.
But they found this hybrid person, right? That was like a little brown, but still really tall with the beard and the hair, and
the good looking. They don't attempt to make him not good looking,
right?
But
I also think that,
and
I get it from a rating standpoint, but I think that is a slightly, he looks quite different than the disciples, strikingly bigger and more, GQ.
Yeah. I really do think, I was thinking about, I think we should strive, if we're going to depict Jesus, to depict him as he was, or as best we think he was, and depict his disciples as different.
Yeah.
And Peter can be a white dude, and, John can be Mexican, and,
sure.
Bartholomew can be an African-American guy or a black guy, that's fine. Like, we can mess around with that because they're just the humans in the story following Jesus, and that's all of us. But I think we have to depict him as he was.
Yeah, that's my preference. And I am not anti trying to depict Jesus in human form, but I don't think I would try myself. Right. I think that is a little problematic. I don't think it's wrong. You're not supposed to have images of God. So some Christian traditions would say you cannot create any image. It's breaking the commandment. But I think in his humanity, that's part of him becoming flesh and identifying with us is that we can actually imagine him.
Right. He imaged himself.
Imaged himself.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should try to image God the Father, but I also think you need to be really careful. And another way I heard it one time was somebody asked, and it was, so Noelle Piper, I think it was, so John Piper's wife, I think it was her, but she has this collection of nativity scenes from all over the world. And in their family home, they would put them all up every Christmas. And somebody asked about the imaging of Jesus, and she said, I think she said it, maybe John said it, but it was, if you're going to do it, make sure the images are very diverse and you don't just do one.
Right.
Like if you have kind of this, like, here are 100 different ways that people imagine Jesus in their image, that diversity would be better than picking your one favorite one that relates to you. And I thought, okay,
right.
I could see a little bit of that.
So why do you think, I mean, there is sort of the devotional form of imaging Jesus where you're drawing him and you're just trying to connect yourself there. And then there is the, like, maybe the missional version of imaging. People are trying to image it to make him relatable to people.
Yeah,
so,
the Jesus film and
right.
or various, like you might show pictures of
right.
in a piece of literature.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of it is then, are we trying to, well, see, Jesus kind of looks like you, or trying to use it as an evangelistic tool? And I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's very complicated. Another thing, and I'm curious what you think about this, is, so when I moved to Chicago, I was studying urban ministry, but they were especially really grappling with kind of liberation theology, and, which is a whole nother conversation. But in that stream, it's very important for the gospel to be very political and very allied with specifically marginalized groups.
Right.
And so I read a book that was on the Black Christ, and it wasn't trying to make an argument that Jesus was born in Africa, but it was making the argument that for Africans, he must be Black. He must have experienced the Black experience, almost more as a concept, so that Black people could use the story to stand for themselves against other people who were using the story for themselves, if that makes sense. And that's another thing I've grappled with. And I struggled with that because I thought that leads, in my mind, maybe to the same sins we've committed with the white Jesus. And I think the response there would be, yeah, but those sins are so strong that other people need that, bolstering of their racial identity to kind of compete.
Right. So, I mean, I think that the white Jesus at some level and to certain communities feels like the colonizing Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. And
it does.
Historically, that's sort of how they've experienced it.
And they absolutely have.
Right.
And liberation theology began, especially in South America, where that's precisely,
right.
I mean, people came in with crucifixes.
Yeah, the question, and that's the hard, for me, as a white person, it's very difficult for me to say, no, you shouldn't do it this way. Because
here's our folks doing it.
Yeah, I mean, who did it? And certainly I didn't, but my community did. And so there is the echoes of it or the actual experience of it in the moment. And
you've been shaped by that.
Sure, my mom. Yeah, no, I mean, my mom has a beautiful picture of Jesus looking out over Jerusalem, but he's definitely the white Jesus looking out over Jerusalem.
The book, Learning to Love the Master, is very,
it's one of the things. It's very important to my mother. I think my thing is, wow, I think it's not a good idea, but I also think, you know what? Jesus is pretty flexible. Yeah. Like the gospel, he's okay. I mean, I think he was not okay with the colonization and the crucifix and the oppressing of people and the mass conversions that happened in South America and just the way it all happened in North America too with the Native Americans. But I also think he works in the midst of all of that. Yeah. He works in liberation theology and he works with misrepresentations of himself. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it and try to process it. I just think I would go back to, I think we really got to strive to have a short, very accurate depiction of a Jewish Jesus.
Yeah.
Because salvation comes through the tree of Jesse, right? Through the Jewish people. Jesus is Jewish. And I think that's super important.
Yeah.
That we stress that, because I think he lived a life that can connect to the marginalized without having to be black or white. I think he can be Jewish, brown little guy.
Yeah. And we should say ancient Jewish doesn't look the same as modern Jewish.
Right.
Which is a whole nother conversation. But I agree. I mean, I think there does need to be a real quest for what people looked like historically in that time. And the truth is that one image that's out there that they reconstructed of what a man of that period would have looked like, I don't see anybody using that at all. Nothing like it.
Right.
Like, he's always like beautified.
Yes.
In every version I see.
Yeah.
And that's a strange thing that we do, is that we want him to be. So Cruz said in our conversation that he looked kind of like a superhero.
Right.
And he was like, I think that's okay. I like that, And I think what's hard about that is it makes Jesus, like, his earthly self was just better than us.
Right.
Was just, in whatever depiction it is, sometimes he's very strong and whatever, version. There's a lot of films out there. Sometimes he's the revolutionary who's taking charge and he's strong.
Right.
Sometimes he's the gentle, like, the father you wish you had because yours was a jerk, but he's nice. Sometimes he's dying on the cross, but he's so ripped he could,
just tear himself off the air
if he wanted to, but he doesn't. And other times he's like just really into like petting sheep, and you're like, oh, he's such a nice guy.
Right.
That was my Warner Salmon picture, was with the sheep.
Right.
And it seems like it's always some kind of aspirational thing that we wish we had. Yeah. Versus a human that's a lot like us, that we can actually go, oh, you truly understand what it is like to be like me. You didn't, in your humanity, you couldn't just rip people to shreds. You weren't always like just content. I mean, he wept, bitterly over God's will for his life. That's relatable to us, right?
He walked through crowds with people not noticing him. Yeah. Until he was 33, probably.
Right. Nobody. And I put in there, like, there's a reason we don't see in the Gospels somebody saying like, "Oh, Jesus, like, how'd you get so tall?" Like, or, like, clearly you're the Son of God. You're.
How come you're not married at 33?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And he was able to kind of blend right in. And people were not. You never hear a description. They're impressed by his teaching. He has this unique authority, but never did they. It's like King Saul, where he just looked impressive.
Right, he was a foot taller.
You never hear those descriptions of Jesus.
Didn't throw a spear very well. No, he's bad at spear throwing.
That's right. Yes, King Saul, and no aim. He was probably right-handed and left-eye dominant, which is really unfortunate.
Or fortunate for Jonathan and David.
Yeah. But it's, I don't know, what am I trying to say? I feel like we lose the connection to Jesus as our substitute, as the one who died in our place when we image him this way. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And I think maybe what we've gotten so obsessed with imaging Jesus that we don't image the disciples that much, and maybe that's where we should be spending our time artistically, is imaging them,
because ultimately we are a lot more like them. Jesus is still God in the flesh. They aren't, but they are used by and welcomed by Jesus.
I you put the picture in your book, right? That's you have a little picture of him.
So I didn't. That picture is the cabin we were staying in Greer.
Okay.
Cruz pointed, how the whole conversation with Cruz started was there was a picture of a native guy, and he said, that looks a lot like my dad.
Right.
And I said, it looks a lot like Jesus. And then our friend Alan chirps in, except for all the turquoise.
For the turquoise, right.
And Cruz is like, no. And just kind of was like, no way, not even. And I was like, well, not exactly, but
a lot closer.
A lot closer.
Yeah.
And that's what started the discussion.
And that's what that little picture's from. Okay.
Yeah, it was it's not the picture in the cabin.
Yeah. All right. But it's still not an attractive picture.
I mean,
right?
not in the
sense of wow, this is a superhero.
Right. I mean, maybe to somebody.
Probably. Well, Jesus was attracted to somebody.
Right.
His mom, I hope, was like, this is not.
He's a good-looking guy.
This is the savior of the world. He's kind of grotesque looking.
Right.
No, I mean, I think I just think I was pondering it when I reread, because I've actually had to read the chapter twice because I read it before we were going to do a podcast, and then I needed to brush up. And I was looking at that picture, thinking, well, if Jesus really looked even close to this, that would be jolting to me culturally.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's good. I think Jesus would be culturally at some level jolting to all of us.
Yeah.
Surprising that this is the one who came to save us.
Well, okay, let's think about it this way. The people of Israel were a unique people that had been created by God, but they didn't look the same. You look at Israel and the Philistines and Goliath, the big, tall, 7+ foot guy. They look different. And the invitation to all those people was that they would bow to the God of Israel and become a part of his people.
Right.
Which was jolting. Goliath, the Philistine, technically should bow on his knees and come serve under a 5'6" king.
Right.
Yeah, he should. And he should worship that God and renounce his bullishness. And so the invitation into the kingdom should be to submit to someone of God's people, to submit to the God in the flesh in the midst of his people.
Right.
Which is it's not submitting to your favorite person, the leader you always wanted, the person you always imagined you would emulate someday, your favorite sports hero, your favorite war hero.
Right.
It's to submit to the man who came in human form as an Israelite, around a couple thousand years ago. It's to submit to the God who was in him and come under his lordship. So I think when we present Jesus as your hero type, we're not really inviting people into the church, because we are odd people. The church is not the most impressive thing on the earth. The church is not providing everybody what they always dreamed of.
Right.
But it is what God has called people to come into and under, because God is in its midst.
Yeah.
And so, when you just think of it that way, we are misrepresenting what God, God's invitation. It's to follow an unimpressive looking Christ who did what none of us could do.
Yeah. That's really good. I like that. And I think as you were talking, one thought that kept coming in, I think, okay, one thing to address in all this is that the white Jesus has caused some problems.
Oh yeah.
And it's been so culturally ingrained that there is maybe some undoing. So there's some purposeful depicting Jesus as different. That's important, I think, to undoing what we've done. And I think it's important for people who are white, like me and you, to say, I don't need that. I don't need white Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not,
I can let go of that.
Yeah. And I think we don't, and I think we need to say that. Like, and I think sometimes we think, well, but that's how I connect. Well, but I have a larger responsibility to my brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
To let go of that, and to let and honestly, to let the other, the Hispanic and the African American and the Native American, like we just everything but white, to like have its own ownership of this, and they have at some level. They're wrestling with it, but
far less in around here.
Yes,
right?
And we have to. It's not just passively. I think there's some active like letting go.
So the church I went to in Chicago, so I was talking about school and liberation theology, but the church I went to in Chicago, I remember the coloring pages for the kids because I did an after-school program there. And like what you were talking about with the disciples, they really spent a lot of time on things like Simon of Cyrene, and like they had a lot of the biblical characters who were black, who were legitimately African.
Yeah.
And so they would have those coloring pages. And I remember just thinking like, good. Like, that's awesome. Like, I actually wish I'd been encouraged to color the diverse, pictures as a kid. Like, that would have been good. And then I noticed, I don't remember like specific instances, but I noticed that when the kids got the coloring pages of Jesus, they just tended to color him black. And why? Because they're black.
Right.
And that's what they would imagine. And they didn't, and that church put work in to not just get anglicized coloring pages, but they also, the picture didn't call for the color black or dark brown, but the kids, because that's what they were thinking through their own lens, that's what they imagined.
Right.
And there is something natural to that. And I think we should be like, just celebrating that. And that church was actually led by an older Dutch guy who decisively said, we're not doing white Jesus around here because that doesn't allow them to connect to Jesus. It doesn't. Right. So he led or let go of something at some point in his life and actually led from a different place.
Yeah.
Which I think was a healthy thing.
Yeah. And I also think this is a conversation I think you have to have in your church. That's what strikes me is like, not how do we depict Jesus, but how do you see Jesus, and how does the cultural Jesus, how has that been imposed on your relationship with Jesus? How do all these different visuals create, an understanding of how you relate to Jesus, and what kind of advantages and disadvantages are there in that, and what's healthy? Yeah. Because on one hand, I think it's actually really healthy for kids to depict Jesus in their likeness. Yeah. As you become an adult, it's to
then go
depict him in his likeness.
Oh, okay. But he really did probably look like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's that. It's like the childish things, and to the adult things.
Well, at some point, children are drawing all people the same.
Yes.
And they're sticks. Yeah. and then you grow out of that, and you realize there are all these amazing diverse cultures, right? And
shapes and sizes.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about, we just got back from Mexico Sunday, doing this house build. And so you've got the Mexican culture, but the people we built the house for, actually, their culture goes back to the ancient Aztecs. They were one of the tribes that maybe the Aztecs had kind of taken over, perhaps, but the mom still spoke some of the ancient Aztec language.
Okay.
And we talked about that, and we tried to talk about it with the kids too. So this family that we are here to help, their people used to rule South America. They ruled. They were the empire.
Right.
Right now our people kind of do.
Right.
But maybe not forever.
Yeah.
We're not in the presence of oh, poor you. We're in the presence of these people might descend from royalty. What do you think of that? And I think it's just helpful to have those kind of, like, to break people open to go, whoa, hold on. There are all these different stories. They built things that were incredible. You think the Empire State Building's something. You should see the things they built in their time. Blew people's minds. I don't know. There's just a lot of, as kids grow up, they start to discover the world's really big. And there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
And then it's good to think more along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a great question from Rick.
Absolutely.
And
so what was the very last landing question? I think we've talked about the dangers.
He was asking what's the advantages and disadvantages to the white and black Jesus and depicting Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
Culturally,
Yeah. I think just back to even the conversation I had with Cruz and thinking about Rick's kids. First of all, Rick, I'm really glad this is on your mind. And I think that I want every kid to be able to imagine Jesus being like them.
Yeah, I think that's key.
Yeah.
That's key, and I think as adults and as leaders in the church, we have to strive to do that.
And then kind of like you're saying right now, and then at some point, I hope every person would realize there was an actual historical Jesus that was maybe quite different than them.
Yeah, and as I think about it, I've just kind of pondered the depictions of Jesus in our church. So in this podcast studio, there is, and I'll put up a picture of it, there is a little bobblehead Jesus, and he's definitely the white Jesus.
Right.
Then there's...
What is he doing with his hands? He looks like he's going, I don't know what's going on.
Pretty much. And then there's my mother's book, which is in our bookstore, which has a very traditional picture.
Yeah.
And then we have a picture done by an artist in our church, and it is a very African-American face of Jesus weeping over a broken world.
Yeah.
And so we have those three depictions. Other than that, we don't have any other depictions, I don't think.
Yeah.
Of visual depictions of Jesus.
I finally got rid of that Warner Salmon image, partly because it came from my great aunt on my mom's side, and my mom said, I think we can let this go now. And I went, okay, I guess so. And interestingly, it was in the little kind of a church-sponsored yard sale, and a Latino family bought it. So there's that.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot to talk about there.
And then, and I was kind of like back and forth on, I don't know. I was like, oh, okay, I don't know. And then in our church, I'm trying to think, the Lutheran church that meets in our building has a crucifix they put up that's ivory colored, the whole thing. And that sticks out to me sometimes. We have a little, so I bought this crucifix in Mexico a couple years ago that was really interesting. It's kind of a pewter cross, but it's modern, so it's ambiguous as to what his body type or race would be. But then the cross is he's on half of it, and then the other half is empty. And I thought that was I'd never seen one like that before, that acknowledged kind of his death on the cross, but also the resurrection, or his not being, that the cross wasn't his only identity.
Right.
And I just thought it was kind of unique. So it's on our Lord's Supper table. But I liked it for all those reasons, that it didn't lock Jesus into any image because of how modern it was. It was, and that it acknowledged both his work on the cross and the cross without Christ, which was kind of a hybrid of kind of Catholic and Protestant thinking and imagery.
Yes, now that I think about it, one more image came up. We have a song and an artist depict Jesus on the cross, and I don't know what race he is in that picture, but people will ask if they come to the village with some knowledge of Catholicism, like, why is Jesus still on the cross in that picture?
Yeah.
But it's a song about Passover, so there's a reason he's on the cross. But
yeah, absolutely. And then it's interesting, like crosses. We have a cross in our building, and people would be like, "Oh, I didn't expect you guys are kind of non-traditional. I wouldn't have expected you to have a cross." The reason we do is back when I was first putting our building together, I bought a bunch of random stuff out at an old closed down ranch.
Okay.
And there was a guy on hand that was helping me load it all and find the things I needed, kind of a worker who was taking care of the property. And he found out it was for a church, and he made this cross out of pieces of one of the old corrals and just presented it to me and was like very proud of it and was like, for your church. And so it's just these old rusted pieces of corral that he welded together and and he wanted us to have it. So the reason we have a cross up is because someone gave it to us as a gift. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a pretty good podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so
That's
too.
good.
Well, hey, thanks, man. Thank you, Rick. Hey, remember, you can always email us a question like Rick did, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com.
That's right.
Our website is up again. It's very simple, but if you want to, go to, if you're like, the podcast app just doesn't feel that personal, I want to go to a website and then click a link and listen to the show. You can. faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. Or sorry, no, faithoverbreakfast.com. And it's
not at gmail.com.
Not at gmail.com. But it's you can email us from there. You can share the podcast from there. And so on and so forth. And thanks for listening.
Yep. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.